Someone in Illinois just won $1.04 billion. And if you're anything like me, the first thought probably isn't about taxes. It's probably, what would I do if that ticket were mine? One ticket, 6 numbers, a $2 purchase that suddenly became worth more than most people could ever imagine earning in an entire lifetime. The winning numbers were 4, 26, 66, 67, 69, and Powerball 9. The ticket was sold at a Hy-Vee Fast Fresh in Quincy, Illinois. And right now, there's one thing almost everyone wants to know. Who has that ticket? We don't know yet. We know where it was sold, we know the numbers, we know the jackpot. But somewhere out there, one person is sitting on a piece of paper worth roughly $1 billion. And they may still be completely anonymous. That's what makes this story so crazy. Because imagine waking up tomorrow, knowing that you are holding the winning Powerball ticket. Your life before that ticket would be over. Not because you suddenly became a different person, but because almost every financial decision you've ever worried about would suddenly look completely different. Your mortgage, your car payment, your credit cards, your retirement, your kids' college, your next paycheck, all of it would suddenly become a very different conversation. But before you buy the dream house, quit your job, or call your family, there's one decision you would have to make. Do you take the $1 billion jackpot over time, or do you take the cash? The advertised jackpot is about $4 billion if taken as an annuity. The lump sum cash option is about $451.5 million before taxes, and that difference is enormous. Because when you hear $1.04 billion, your brain immediately imagines $1 billion sitting in one giant bank account. That's not what happens. The annuity is paid through 30 increasing payments over 29 years. The cash option gives the winner the current lump sum instead, and both numbers are before taxes. So, if you're the person holding that ticket, you suddenly have one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. And you've probably never made a decision even remotely like it before. Think about that. Most people spend years trying to decide whether they should buy a $30,000 car. This person may have to decide what to do with $451.5 million in cash. And the first thing I would probably do? Nothing. Seriously, nothing. I'd sign the ticket, I'd secure it, I'd tell as few people as possible, and I'd get professional legal and financial advice before making any major move. Because the weirdest thing about suddenly becoming incredibly wealthy is that the money itself may not be your biggest problem. Everyone else is. Imagine your phone suddenly starts ringing, a cousin you haven't talked to in 10 years, an old friend from high school, someone you worked with years ago, someone with a business idea, someone who needs help, someone who suddenly remembers how much they love you. And now you have to wonder, do they want me or do they want my money? That's a question most wealthy people eventually have to deal with. But imagine going from a normal life to hundreds of millions of dollars overnight. You don't get years to adjust. You don't slowly build wealth. You don't gradually learn what it feels like to have money. You go from worrying about money to having more money than you could realistically spend in one lifetime. And that's when something strange happens. Money stops being about survival. It becomes about decisions. Before winning, you might ask, can I afford this? After winning, you might ask, should I buy this? Those sound like similar questions. They're not. If you have $3,000 in your checking account, a $1,000 purchase is a serious decision. If you have $450 million, a $1,000 purchase barely registers, and that can completely change the way you think. A $10,000 dinner doesn't sound like $10,000 anymore. A $100,000 car doesn't feel like $100,000. A $1 million house doesn't feel like an impossible dream. And that's where sudden wealth can become dangerous. Not because the person can't afford something, but because the amount of money can become so large that ordinary spending stops feeling real. And then there are the people around you. Let's say you're 35 years old. You win the lottery. You now have enough money to potentially never work again. What happens Monday morning? Do you go back to work? Do you tell your boss? Do you quietly submit your resignation? What about your spouse, your parents, your siblings, your children? Do you tell them immediately? Do you tell them how much you won? Do you give them money? If your brother asks for $200,000 to start a business, what do you say? If your parents want a new house, do you buy it? If your best friend says, come on, you've got hundreds of millions, what's $50,000 to you? How do you answer? These are questions that sound like fantasy, but they're suddenly real for one person in Illinois. And that's why I think the most fascinating part of this Powerball story isn't the $1.04 billion. It's the fact that we don't know who won. Think about how strange that is. Millions of Americans know that someone won. The winning numbers are public. The store is known. The jackpot is known. But the winner can still be sitting quietly somewhere, holding the ticket. Maybe they're watching the news right now. Maybe they're laughing because nobody knows. Maybe they've already told their spouse. Maybe they're terrified. Maybe they're staring at the ticket and thinking, what do I do now? And honestly, that's probably the most important question. Because winning the lottery doesn't come with a manual. There's no class called How to Become Extremely Wealthy Overnight. There's no preparation period. One day you're an ordinary person, the next day you're facing decisions that could affect your family for generations. And then there's taxes. The headline says $1.04 billion. But that's not what the winner simply gets to spend. The cash option is approximately $450 and $5 million before taxes. Federal taxes matter. State taxes can matter, depending on the circumstances. And the final amount the winner keeps is not simply the number printed on the lottery announcement. That's another reason the headline number can be misleading. The lottery jackpot is a gigantic number designed to grab your attention. And it works, because $1 billion sounds almost imaginary. But $450 million? That's still almost impossible to imagine. So let's put it another way. Suppose you suddenly had $450 million. You could buy a $2 million house. You could buy a $200,000 car. You could travel. You could help your family. You could donate. You could invest. And after doing all of that, you would still have an amount of money that most people could never realistically spend. That's when the question changes. It isn't, how do I make more money? It's, how do I make sure this money doesn't destroy my life? Because money can buy freedom, but money can also create pressure. It can change friendships. It can change marriages. It can change families. It can change how strangers treat you. It can change how you see yourself. And suddenly, privacy becomes valuable. Imagine walking into your favorite restaurant and knowing everyone in the room could recognize you. Imagine your name appearing online. Imagine strangers asking for money. Imagine people telling you that you owe them something because you're rich. Now imagine all of that happening before you've even had time to process what happened. That's why the first few days after winning could be more important than the first few years. The temptation would be to celebrate. And honestly, who could blame you? You just won $1 billion lottery. But the smartest move may be to slow everything down. Don't make 10 life-changing decisions in one weekend. Don't buy 10 houses. Don't promise money to everyone. Don't invest in your friend's new company because you feel guilty saying no. Don't assume that because someone is wealthy, they're automatically good with money. And don't confuse having a lot of money with understanding money. Those are two completely different things. A person can earn millions and lose it. A person can win hundreds of millions and make terrible decisions. And a person can have enough money to last several generations and still spend their life worrying about losing it. So maybe the biggest question isn't, would you rather have $1.04 billion or $450.5 million? Maybe the real question is, what would money actually change about you? Would you still work? Would you still live in the same house? Would you still drive the same car? Would you still hang out with the same people? Would you still know who your real friends are? Would you tell your family? Would you move? Would you disappear? Would you give money away? Would you try to build a business? Would you invest everything? Would you keep your life almost exactly the same? Because here's something interesting. Most people dream about winning the lottery because they want freedom. Freedom from bills, freedom from debt, freedom from a job they hate, freedom from financial anxiety, freedom from worrying about the future. And that part is understandable. Imagine never checking your bank account before paying a bill. Imagine never worrying about rent. Imagine never being afraid of an unexpected $5,000 emergency. Imagine knowing that your children are financially secure. That kind of freedom would be extraordinary. But once you have that freedom, you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. And maybe that's the part nobody thinks about. We spend so much of our lives trying to get money. We rarely stop and ask what happens when money is no longer the problem. For one person in Illinois, that question may have just become real. A $2 ticket, 6 numbers, 1 winner, and a jackpot worth about $1.04 billion. The ticket was sold in Quincy, Illinois. The winning numbers were 4, 26, 66, 67, 69, and 9. The cash option is approximately $450 and $5 million before taxes. And right now, the person holding that ticket remains a mystery. Maybe there's someone who has struggled financially their entire life. Maybe they're already comfortable. Maybe they're young. Maybe they're old. Maybe they bought the ticket on the way home from work. Maybe it was a completely random decision. We'll eventually find out more. But until then, there's something strangely fascinating about knowing that somewhere in Illinois, an ordinary person may be sitting on an extraordinary secret. And if that ticket were in your pocket tonight, you'd probably have a million things running through your mind. Who do I tell? Where do I go? Do I take the cash? Do I take the annuity? How much will I actually keep? Can I trust anyone? And most importantly, how do I make sure this changes my life for the better? Because winning $1.04 billion might be the easiest part. Figuring out what to do with it could be the real jackpot.